And now back on the Dude Maker Hotline yet again, and we're glad to have him, Congressman Ron Paul of Texas, GOP candidate for the presidency. Congressman Paul, always a pleasure, my friend. How are you?
Doing fine. Thanks for having me again.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Congressman Paul, I want to start off today by asking a question that just got phoned in from a listener. And he was a very passionate older gentleman, I would say, and he was a military veteran. And he wanted to know what does Congressman Paul mean when he uses the term militarism? Because he said, the gentleman said that some people that are ex-military take great offense to that because they think you are disparaging the troops. I'd like to give you an opportunity to answer that.
Well, national defense is very important. That's high on the list as a constitutional responsibility of the federal government. But and you need military for that. So defense and military to fight declared wars and protect our country, that's very legitimate. Militarism, to me, is when you use the military to do things that have nothing to do with our defense, that you start wars, that you occupy other countries, you get involved in the internal affairs of other nations, you get involved in nation building. You build weapons that you don't need. You're doing what Eisenhower warned us against, that the military-industrial complex, through their lobbying, drives the foreign policy, and you build weapons that really are not necessary for our defense. So that, to me, is the difference. The military for national defense is one thing. Militarism, to get us just into more trouble, it's very dangerous.
But it is the civilian leadership that writes the policies and directs the militarism, correct?
Right. So it is technically it is the policies that have to be changed. Of course, a lot of it's a combination of things because just like so many who say, well, I do what the commanders tell me we need to do, and they fall into it. But technically, it is the foreign policy, and that's one area where the president has a lot of authority. So as president, I could change that rather quickly. I have control of the troops. We could change our troops around, and you could shift from militarism and these wars of occupation and shift it back to national defense and bring our troops home and maybe worry more about our own borders than the borders in Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Now, speaking of the troops overseas and our involvements overseas and what have you, we just witnessed the fall of Muammar Gaddafi and I guess the execution, you would call it, in Libya. You and Congressman Kucinich, way back in May of this year, had tried to stop this by offering some sort of a resolution to impeach the president. Has the case against President Obama now passed into the ether? Is he going to get away with this, or is there still a case for this?
Well, there's always a case for it, but there's no stomach for it. And, impeachment is sort of done for political reasons, not for the violation of the Constitution. Just think of the impeachment of Clinton was politically driven, and I think it's admitted that it's a political issue because it's pushed not so much in a ordinary court. No, there's nobody going to do that because Republicans actually, when that all started, they're less excited about Libya now, but when it started, they were praising him, and some still do. They say, wonderful victory in Libya, on to Syria, and after Syria, it's on to Iran. So that's the kind of militarism that I don't like. But there's not going to be any impeachment over this.
And that gives me a great follow-up question. Has the move toward a modest foreign policy, which seemed back in the spring when the GOP debates first started, has it chilled since Alaki has been taken out, since Gaddafi has been, I guess, successfully, if you want to call it that, brought down, since we executed some kind of regime change in Egypt? Seems that I'm not hearing a lot about this and modest foreign policy except from you.
Yeah, because they claim just, for a president to get up and they kill another bad leader in another country, which was probably none of our business, and the people of those countries should determine their self-determination. So that bothers me, but the whole thing is it's a victory for international government and world government, and it's a failure for our system because they go into places like Libya and Uganda and probably into Syria and all the countries that we're involved in with our CA and bombing all these countries. Congress doesn't know anything about it. They don't give permission for this. So they go to the NATO and United Nations for this permission. So actually inadvertently, let's say, I don't think there's going to be much good come out of Libya. I think they're going to be fighting and killing for a long time. Just as in Egypt now, there's a government there that's determined to be very anti-Israel. So I think if there's a really, really clean victory from their viewpoint, it's actually dangerous because it encourages them. It's, we've just had this victory in Libya, so we can do the same thing in Syria. One of these days, we're going to go broke, and we're going to come home for economic reasons, which is the reason governments usually quit this kind of stuff. It's not because they lose their appetite for spreading their empire. They lose their appetite, they really lose their ability because they no longer can afford it. That's how we finally so-called beat the Soviets. So they beat themselves for economic reasons. They stretched themselves too far, and they finally had to quit.
Right, and that was one of the things when I saw you on Meet the Press with David Gregory. Congressman Ron Paul is with us here, folks. When I saw you on Meet the Press with David Gregory, you always impressed me with your knowledge of foreign affairs, and I don't think he even knew what you were talking about when you said, look, the Christians in northern Iraq are being killed, they're being kicked down. You have the Turks in there with the Iranians. How is it that you stay up on all of these foreign excursions and the names of the leaders and what have you? How do you stay up on all this stuff?
Well, thank goodness for the internet. In the old days, it was a lot more. It was a lot more difficult. And some people say, "Well, you can't believe everything on the internet." Well, I'll tell you what. If you read it carefully, what you get on the internet, it can be a lot better than what you get from the government propagandists or from our major networks. That's where even when we have our top secret briefings in Washington, which I don't attend because I've decided all I hear is the propaganda, then I'm handicapped because if I happen to hear something in there and repeat it, I get into trouble.
Right.
So I avoid it all. But when they had these top secret briefings before Iraq, others that have gone there said all we were told were the lies about how they had nuclear weapons and they were going to attack us, and Al-Qaeda was there. Of course, Al-Qaeda is in Iraq now. Now that we're leaving with this great victory, the Christians, many of them have left, more than half have left, as well as the Al-Qaeda is in Iraq where they weren't there before.
Let's switch to the subject of economics here, which should be your strong suit, and I believe that it is. You introduced a plan a week ago to cut $1 trillion off the federal budget. You had a nice press conference out there in Las Vegas, Nevada. You got one chance to mention it during the debate. Now today, Governor Perry will announce his plan for a flat tax, and the media will swoon, and there will be all manner of discussion over this. But he doesn't even bring the budget into balance until 2020. What do you say about this? And it is a possibility. I mean, it is a doable thing to execute the Ron Paul Restore America Now plan and balance the budget by 2015, right?
Yeah, and it proves they have no interest in cutting. Absolutely zero interest, because the only budget that counts is the year's budget. I mean, everything out, Congresses change, attitudes change. They can't do anything. But all they're doing is proposing to cut the proposed increases. So they're not real cuts. That's why they're not serious. And we're ready for another a credit downgrade. And the world's falling apart, and it comes from too much spending and too much debt, and we're up against the wall, and they say, no, what we really have to do is get the government to spend more money and get the people who don't have jobs to spend more money to stimulate the economy. It's absolutely absurd, and that's why we have made no progress, no new jobs, and it's going to continue this way. If we don't change the policies, we're going to be in this mess for a long time to come.
Well, let's stay on that same subject now. Where you've traveled to New Hampshire? I know you've been out to California for the GOP convention. You traveled to Iowa here recently. Have you been warmly received when you've announced or talked about the $1 trillion first-year cut to balance the budget by 2015?
Absolutely. In the audience that come, and even on the young people especially. I was at the University of Iowa the other day, and we had about 1,200 show up, and they were wildly enthusiastic about it. And when I talk about, letting young people get out of Social Security, they're very excited about that. So, no, it's well received, but that doesn't mean that we've won the fight. because when you get outside of the groups of people coming that know a little bit about what you're doing, that's different. But if you're going to try to talk to everybody who has been a supporter of Romney and Perry, they're going to say, "Oh no, that's too much. We need government. You want to just cut all this stuff off." But I think it's foolhardy because they're going to continue what we're doing, and they will be the participants of a very bad result.
Did you take any offense to Herman Cain saying he would trust you the least with the presidency and that all you want to do is cut, and not fix?
Not personally, but philosophically, I take a lot of offense to it. But I put the whole other group in one lump as far as philosophy goes, because they all fall Keynesian economics.
Right.
None of them. Some of them now are starting to talk about auditing the Fed, but nobody else is saying, well, we don't even need the Fed, and we need to bring our troops home, we need to balance our budget immediately, we need to protect our civil liberties. None of them are saying that. Some are just a little bit more offensive when they start name-calling, but I think philosophically they all support the same thing. And that's.
I had a question for you. I had two questions left on my sheet here.
Okay.
The first one was, yesterday the president said, and I'm quoting here, that we cannot wait for Congress, and so I'm going to have to go around them. Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution says that all legislative powers herein granted are granted to a Congress of the United States. Number one, if the president does this, is this yet not another example of executive authority overreaching? And as you said earlier, there's no stomach for impeachment, but this could be an impeachable offense. And number two, would you ever use, as president, your executive pen to go around the Congress?
No, absolutely. That is what's wrong. Now, they've been doing it for years because technically all regulations written by the executive branch are illegal. Executive orders, other than those functions that you're permitted to do as president, they are illegal. They can't legislate that way. So I would say that this is more dangerous because he's blatant about it. They go to war without declaration, but this thing going into Libya, he was very blatant about it. He said, "I don't need to tell you. I get my orders from NATO and the United Nations." So they've done it before, but this attitude, I think, is very significant. I mean, it was sort of the attitude about, we do now have the authority to assassinate American citizens. This is very dangerous. They've been assassinating people for a good while, and our CIA's been involved, but they at least knew it was wrong, and they kept it secret. But the fact that they're putting it out on the table, I think, is a very dangerous trend.
Okay, so the final question is, you were in Iowa over the weekend, and you spoke to the Value Voter Summit, or the Family Values Coalition there. And I actually saw your speech on C-SPAN yesterday, and I noticed that you spent a good amount of time talking about how you cannot restore laws without people understanding that laws come from God. And I don't hear you talk about this very much, but I think when you do, there's another side of you that people are not aware of. So if you want, elaborate on that for just a moment.
Well, my point is too often some people who put themselves into the conservative fundamentalist camp think that if you have more laws, you'll be more moral. And I say that laws can't make you moral. But if we are a moral people, which was advised by our founders, then a free society can work. Then the laws can be moral. But you can't do it the other way. You can't mold people by more legislation. I'm sure you understand that, because if people have bad habits, just passing a lot of laws are not going to make them moral. But if you have a correct moral understanding of the law, and I like to think about the moral understanding that Bastiat had about the law. You can't, the government can't do anything that you and I can't do. I think that's quite different, and I bring that into context of our religious beliefs in the Old Testament and the responsibility of the family and the local church, rather than the federal government trying to solve all our problems.
All right, Congressman Paul, Godspeed to you. Best of luck to you. Keep up the good, hard work. And I know you got to go, but thanks for rejoining us after the technical
Okay.
Thank you. We'll talk to you again soon.